Now, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. So let me explain. First off, it's free. I'm not joking, you guys. The Anchor app, it is free to use. Second, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Now that's awesome, isn't it? Third, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard everywhere, you guys, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and so many more platforms. Fourth, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Now, is that awesome, you guys, or what? That's just terrific. And finally, it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So I have another podcast with Anchor, and I'm just loving Anchor so much. I love it. It's so very easy to use, guys. So why don't you download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. What's up, you guys, and welcome to the official podcast of Damian Talks Education. So listen up. I am here to talk about all things education on my podcast. So get prepared for some realness and honesty of education as I walk you down through various of topics that's happening in the education world with some amazing guests, to sharing stories relating to education and so much more, because I got you covered with education. So join me on this journey of education with me. And welcome back to Damian Talks Education. My first guest began in education as a middle school math teacher, then moved into campus technology. I also who host the weekly Twitter chat, RGV Ed Chat, connecting educators around the Rio Grande Valley to each other and also around the world. And also, goal is to help close the digital divide by supporting teachers and their efforts to implement technology. So everyone, please welcome on to the podcast, Mr. James Varlack. Welcome to Damian Talks Education, Mr. James Varlack. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on to my podcast.
Glad to be here.
So let's get started here with you telling us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is James Varlack. I am currently a digital learning specialist, and I work in a district in South Texas. The district is McAllen ISD, great district, 31,000 students, 30 schools. We are growing, continuing to grow. In South Texas, I mean, like, the city I live in is Mission, and that's about like every day I drive to work, I can see the border wall that they're constructing. So that's where I'm at. I'm an 11-year educator. I taught math 6th and 7th grade for 6 years, and then I moved into technology. So I started working at a high school, doing some support and doing some training. And now, in the role that I'm in now, I do all training. So we train teachers, students on devices, on programs and resources. And I work on a great team with my director, Ms. Vega, and then Rosie and Gonzalo are my two fellow coworkers. So yeah, that's currently what I'm doing right now.
All right, perfect. So since you are an educator, you said this is your 11th year teaching.
That's correct.
I want to know what inspired you of wanting to become an educator in the first place. Did it quite run down in the family? Did you have a influence person on your life? Just who inspired you to go into the field of education?
Okay, that is a great question. So if I had to say who was it that inspired me, I will say in the same district that I work, I have a brother, an older brother, who is a math teacher right now. So short story. So when I finished my undergrad degree, I did it in accounting. So I wanted to be an accountant. I wanted to go the whole CPA route and, work with a lot of accounts and funds and be at a desk all day. But when I started working in the field, it felt a little monotonous, I guess, to a degree, very routine, right? So get up, finish my accounts, finish my transactions, checking everything, balance everything, and then I was done. So the firm, the little place that I worked, it really took me a couple of hours to finish, and then after that, I was really like having to check out other things. So in that sense, it was a little routine, right? So here in Texas, when you get your undergrad in a particular field other than education, they have alternative certification programs. So in the meantime, while I was working as an accountant, I went ahead and did my alternative certification. And so it was 3 months, took the test, was able to pass. And so I had that kind of like on the back end. But I did some substitute teaching for my brother at one of his campuses, right? So got in there. It seemed like it was very engaging, right? Things were moved a lot more. So you were like creating a lesson, sub, right? They're pretty much following what the teacher's guidelines were, but you still at times have, issues with management. You have to kind of take up. You have issues where you have to kind of like figure things out. Like, okay, there's a little problem here. How can I help this student, or change something up for the class for the next class? How did it work? And continue, right? So that all kind of roped me in a little bit. I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. I think I can kind of do this. And so there was a position that was open, and there were several, right? So I applied at one, which is in my city. There's a local junior high school, Mission Junior High School. So I applied and got the position, and from there was a math teacher. And so if I had to say, were there inspirations? So in my hometown of Cleveland, Tennessee, so I'm from Tennessee originally, in my elementary years, from elementary, no black male teachers in elementary school, right? So my inspirations, I had a 4th grade teacher named Miss Brewster, and then I had a 5th grade teacher named Miss Painter. And I remember Miss Painter just came and told me one day, she said, you know what, I tried to do well in the classroom, right? I felt like I wanted to do well. So she came to me and told me one day, like, hey, there's something you choose that you want to be and want to do. You know what, you definitely have the ability to do that. And I think that was like the first time, other than my parents, somebody kind of like encouraging me in that way. So that kind of put a spark, and I'm like, okay, cool. So then, got into high school, in junior high, or junior high and high school. So that's where I first met my first, teachers of color, right? So a great history teacher, Miss Ector, and then I had Miss Henley. She was also another history teacher. Those were 2 excellent teachers that I had. And the assistant principal at school was a black gentleman, Mr. Hines. So those folks, took me under my wing. They kind of, continued to grow me and stuff like that. Got to high school, not too many educators of color there in the high school as well. But, I guess those influences, my dad has always kind of been like, he's a minister, but he's been a teacher. So he's always kind of also kind of led me down that route. But I will definitely say, once I got into the classroom substitute teaching, I kind of figured out like, okay, this is something that I can definitely do. And my brother for sure gave me all the tips and resources and encouragement to continue that.
That's good. So speaking with education, what does that word mean to you, education? Was it so important in your family, and why do you think it is so important for many people around the world?
Another good question. Damian's 2 for 2 there, 2 for 2. Okay. Okay. So education. So my family, so just quick on my background, my mom and dad are from the Virgin Islands, right? They're from the Caribbean. So they were born in the Caribbean, raised in the Caribbean, and they were in the British education system. Okay. So there's British Virgin Islands and American United States, US Virgin Islands, right? So they were on the British side. So they got up into that system, and in that system, same thing, you do like tests, right? So you have a grade, you get a test, you move on. And so when you're like in high school, they start gearing you towards a career or a trade, right? So my dad was an accountant, so he was geared that way. And so my mom was focused on literature and reading and that area. So they had a great background their parents were, you know, poor because they were island people, right? They live on an island, like ain't nobody rich on an island, pretty much, right? So, but they encouraged, you know, education was the way, right? So, mom and dad, you know, got married. They moved to the United States, and I had some older siblings. I have five brothers and sisters, or six brothers and sisters, excuse me. And it was always encouraged in the house that school is the priority, right? School is priority, and not in the sense that like it's, you know, you're going just to go, you know, to make us, you know, look good and all that. Like, no, like we want you to learn how to learn for yourselves. We want you to grow yourselves, connect with people, connect with others, and you know, one day you'll figure out kind of something that you can do with it, and then you'll have, you know, your career, your job, and your life really kind of takes off, right? So I have a twin brother, and so that was a good thing, right? So we always challenged each other in the classroom. So we would challenge each other. He'd get a grade on this, I'd get a grade on this. And, you know, back then, like putting twins in the classroom wasn't a big deal, right? So we pretty much had every class together, right? And it was cool. You know, we're fraternal, but people still got us mixed up and all that stuff like that, right? So that was funny. But he really did challenge me. And so I always wanted to outdo him in any studies that I did, right? So anyway, so all that said, all my siblings graduate high school. Up until that time, until I got my degree, I only had the brother who was a teacher. He's the only one that had finished his bachelor's or master's or any higher ed degree, right? So when I moved here to South Texas, I had an associate's, and I felt like that was a good, you know, degree to have. It was again in accounting, and so I was able to do some accounting work with that. But when I met my wife, she was like bachelor's complete, master's complete. And so if you're a young person out there, you're listening to this podcast, I'm telling you, if you have education as a background to offer someone that you like or someone that you want to be connected to, that is a great thing to have, man. You can't no one can take that away from you. It's always something to have. So so I had to up my game. So I straight up got in there, finished my bachelor's, and you know, she was okay with that right now. Right now, she's okay with that. But she's like, hey, master's is on the horizon for you. But that's my kind of educational story, and that's why I feel like education is important. You need to be able to offer something to someone. Like if you want to be employed, what are you going to offer them, right? You can say you can hard work, you're diligent, you're on time, and all that. Those are awesome and amazing things. But a degree is something that's a piece of paper that most everybody now looks as a standard. You need to be able to offer that thing to them, right? So have some type of degree, right? Associates, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, whatever you have, you can always offer that. No one can take it away. What I think education means around the world today is, so in my role with this whole pandemic, our job is to help teachers and students improve their learning with technology, right? So, so we've been super busy since March. In March, our districts, everything kind of shut down. Everybody was at home doing remote. So a couple of things that you get to see. Number one, right away, not everybody has not every home is equal in how the technology they use is going to be used for education. Okay, one home could have, you know, Macs, they could have nice laptops, they could have great internet. You could go to another home, they could not have internet at all. They're using the Wi-Fi on the hotspot, and they may not have a device, right? They may only be using the device provided by the school. So that is one thing for sure that has been a big eye-opener, right? And when you know it's out there, but then really when it comes back to you to find an answer, right? So let's say you're in a big district, our district's 30,000 kids. Well, we may have 10,000 that are set. That means there's 20,000 that need some type of support. How are you going to get those things ready for them, get them devised in the midst of a pandemic, right? So that's what we've been doing for the last 9 months, okay? The other thing I would say is all you need for learning to occur is a teacher with some passion and students who are willing to learn, okay? That's all you need, right? You don't need a fancy classroom with all these glitter, all this stuff. You don't need a big smart board. All these things are really great to have, but that's all you need. So at the basis, right, if the teacher can connect with the students on some level, right, it may not be like they like you. It may not be, they need to respect you, no doubt, but it may not be they like you. But it always works better, right, if the student likes you and has a good rapport. So for me, like that is what education is kind of summed up for me right now. Teachers need to be able to connect with their students, like no doubt. If you can't do that, they ain't gonna come back to your calls, right? They're not gonna come back to your classrooms. You got to be able to connect with them. The kid that's the kid that you give the least amount of time. There's a whole realm of students out there that are just going through the motions, right? Because they're only getting the least amount of connected time with that teacher. So I think like education right now it's extremely important, again, continuing, but we all have to make amends on both sides. The teachers are working their butts off, tails off. Students have issues and they're trying to deal with those while, going through school. So I think that's kind of where we're at in education kind of today.
Absolutely. I totally agree with you on that. And speaking on virtual learning, what are your thoughts on that with virtual? How is your school dealing with that? And do you think once this pandemic is over with, we will still be dealing with virtual learning into the classrooms?
Good question. Okay, so how our district was preparing for it was, so our district is 1-to-1, right? Every kid in every level has access to a device, okay? And then the teacher on that end should have some knowledge of the device and be using it actively with kids, right? It doesn't have to be every day, but something, they're gonna be doing something. The kids are gonna be, we have Google accounts, we have Microsoft Office accounts. The kids have access to apps from an app store that at the elementary level. So elementary level is iPads, secondary level is Chromebooks, okay? So that is already set. So that foundation is set, good to go. Now, the teachers, most of the teachers, a lot of the teachers need some type of training or they need some help getting all of those things together, right? Because, so virtual learning, pretty much what it is, to kind of answer his question, but how I kind of feel about it was there was this big digital gorging, right? When you go to a table and if you like go have this big feast right in front of you, you can kind of gorge yourself, right? People are like, look, all this food is yours. You can do with it whatever you want. So a lot of these companies, a lot of these great educational tools were being made for free. And so what teachers were doing is just straight up gorging, right? They were finding, oh, I've always wanted to do this. Oh, I've never had access to this, never had money for this. Okay, let's use it. Let's try it. Let's do it. Okay. So in our district, we kind of saw the same thing. Teachers had access to all these resources. They were able to go home, get their devices connected, get their kids on. This is so great. This is great, right? And so then after the gorge is over, right, you're sitting there, you've kind of overstuffed yourself. If you haven't like been disciplined, you've overstuffed yourself. So now some teachers had access to all these tools, but maybe they weren't a master of one or two, right?
Right.
So in our district, our job was to kind of find those tools that our district made available and kind of streamline for educators so that they become masters of it, right? So if I wanted to become a Google level educator 1, right, we're going to do training on these Google tools, or if you want to become trained in Pear Deck, right, we'll have these tools or these trainings available. So we try to kind of streamline those things to help support what teachers were doing, right? So all that, got that ready. So then May happened, June happened, we get summer. So now this is the time for teachers and students to kind of retool, right? So on the student end, students finally getting access to hotspots. So instead of using that phone or having to share Wi-Fi with like 7 or 8 different devices right in the home, they got their own personalized hotspot. So connections got better, right? They were able to get on the Meet, turn on their video. And so then they got very familiar with the tools, right? So pretty much a student, they don't need a training per se. Like my kids, I have a 7 and a 5-year-old and a 9-month-old, but the 7 and 5-year-old, if I want them to try something, I just give it to them and I say, hey, just go through this and try it. And they do, right? And then they'll tell me, hey, daddy, how you do this and blah, blah, blah. But So that's how the students were doing that. They were trying, getting used to everything, and getting the routines down. Okay, so now summer happens, we get a chance to retool. Okay, great. Now this worked, this didn't work. Okay, let's kind of streamline it. And so now when the new year starts, our year starts in August, and we didn't start late. We started right on time, and we've been going ever since. And so we have the choice. So gave students and parents the choice. So it was either you can be completely virtual, or you can start sending your kids back after this certain time. So we have, out of 31,000, we have like 3,000 students that are coming on campus, right? And teachers are on campus in their rooms, social distancing guidelines, all that stuff. Okay. So on that end, I think it worked. What I feel like is still a challenge is like for little students, right? They need interaction, man. Like they need a body they could actually physically talk to and say, I need help with this. Can you help me? Because right, social distancing, you really can't go to a student's desk per se. You can't like say, okay, can so you have to do it from a distance. So that kind of loses that interactive piece, right? Now, older students, when they get in grades 3, 4, 5, they really are becoming adept at like fixing their own problems. So that is really cool. Parents got this just like straight up immersion in how to use tech, right? And so you have families that have not parents, grandparents, right? You got families where mom and dad may be working all day, and the grandparents or an older sister or somebody's at home. They may be sent to a daycare, and the daycare workers are like having to help them get on all this stuff. So like, it feels like inequities abound, but everyone has put their best foot forward and is doing the best they can. Okay. So for us, that's what remote learning has looked like. Now, I will say, if you're an educator, want to be an educator, listen to this podcast, whatever, you need to know a couple of things. If I could just like get on my soapbox, okay? Learn how to use a computer. I don't care what kind of computer it is, like Apple, whatever floats your boat, Apple's, Windows, whatever, Lenovo, HP, learn how to use a computer. And what I mean by learn is like, yes, you can turn it on, learn how to like go through a little troubleshooting, like something's not working, blah, 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 without having to take it over to maybe a Best Buy or somewhere like that, right? If it's something small, do some research, use your phone for Google, look up things. That would be like a big tip, right? Number 2 is find out wherever you're going, whatever district you're going to, what they have available, and get up to speed on it. So if you're going to a Google district, if you're going to a district that uses Microsoft or whatever, get on Twitter, get on some of their social media platforms and learn, go to the education centers and learn how to kind of do some of this stuff. Watch YouTube, right? YouTube is the biggest learning management system of all, because you can find anything. Get on there, learn how to do some things, right? Because you'll be ready, because you don't want to be behind on this. I'm just telling you, getting on a live meeting and running a live meeting, just like Damian and I are doing right now, is not an easy thing to do. Okay. So get yourself up to speed on those things. And then the third thing I would say is find a group that you can connect to. Get on a social media group, a teacher group, get on Twitter. Twitter's like a great resource. We both connected on BME's Talk. So that's how we're able to have conversations, we connect, and then we learn from each other, right? So those are a few things. So do those things, and then when you are put in a position where you have to do remote learning, it still is going to be new. Still, distance learning is still going to be new, still going to be fresh, but you will have some kind of background instead of just walking in from it day one, cold turkey. Okay, so that's what I would definitely say.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. And you just said BME's Talk, so why don't you tell my listeners what is BME Talks and how does it work?
Okay, BME's Talk is a group, and the group is it's actually more now of like a social group. It's becoming a kind of global group. So BME's Talk was started by some educators, and those educators, Black male teachers, got together and they wanted to form a chat to kind of connect with other Black male educators around the country, right, and around the world.
Right.
So this is year three, I believe. You're three. I believe it's your three. So anyway, I got on the first couple chats, connected with some guys, followed them on Twitter. And so they have a chat every week. It's on Tuesdays at 8 o'clock Eastern, I believe. 8 o'clock Central. No, 7 o'clock Eastern time. Sorry, 7 o'clock Eastern, 7 p.m. Eastern time. And so we get on there. It's 5 or 6 questions. You get on there. You follow, some of the guys, principals, teachers, administrators, superintendents, all from all the gambit, right? So you can connect with those. And so now, when it turned into a little chat, is now turning into kind of like this great way to find and connect with Black male educators, right? So Ayodele Harrison, who kind of is leading it, he now is doing workshops across the country because there wasn't really a space for Black male educators on Twitter that we had seen that was consistent enough to connect, right? So these brothers that are doing it are consistent, and they have a format, they've got plans, and what they do is they want to welcome you into the chat, right? So I know Damian was a guest host before. I've been a guest host before. And so if you're looking for a space, you may be in a district where you might be the only one, right? Where I teach, like, there ain't no brothers except for me and my brother. That's it. And there's maybe 2,000-3,000 educators. There's maybe a couple more, but that's it. 5 or 6 out of 2,000. So it's a great space within Twitter that's created its own little space to connect. So it's just, you get on, you introduce yourself, 6 questions, you answer the questions, and then from there, the conversation can kind of spiral. So you can continue your conversation with another teacher, maybe that's in your discipline or your grade level. You can find guys that are looking for workshop people to present, people to get hired. I mean, all those things kind of sort of happen within that space. So, I know there's a big Black male educator group on Facebook now too, as well. I don't think it's related to BMEs, but they do kind of bounce things off each other. But so these are all great spaces where if you're looking for encouragement and, some guys to talk to that look like you, that do the same things you do, definitely Black male educators is a great group to do that.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe, and I had this conversation on my other podcast with my good friends, that now more than ever, we need more brotherhood to come together to talk about topics of education, and especially we need more Black men to enter into the field of education, because we need more of them. That 2%, and I talk about this a lot, it's just we need more of us to enter into the field of education, because we are powerful, we can do anything, we are creative, and we need our brotherhood. We do. We need our brotherhood. So that is what I believe, and I like that of the BME's talk. I love their discussions on there. So
real quick, Damian,
yes.
If y'all are listening, that 2% that he's talking about, that 2% is usually congregated in certain specific areas.
Yes.
So like I was talking about here, like there's only maybe less than 10 educators of color, of black teachers, right? In my district, like that's for like 200, 300, 400 miles, right? Until you get to San Antonio, I may not see another Black person that's an educator, right? So what we're saying is like maybe in like the Philly area, or maybe in an area that's a bigger city, or out in California, that 2% is congregated. So they're connected because they have people that districts that are schools that are maybe inner city or whatever, that are or specialized schools or regular public schools that have a lot of Black people working within that group. But most of that 2% is spread out. So like what Damian is saying is like, he may not see someone else that looks like him or connects with him, that's not local, right? So that's why BMEs is like that one space where you can kind of go and find a bunch of brothers that kind of can encourage you and look like you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now you host a weekly Twitter chat called RGV Ed Chat, where you are connecting with educators around the regional Grand Valley to each other and also around the world. So why don't you tell us about this chat here that you do?
Sure. So RGV, like you just mentioned, is for Rio Grande Valley, and the Rio Grande Valley is a big stretch of land here in South Texas. Stretches kind of like, I mean, if you had to just make specifics, Laredo all the way to Brownsville. Okay, and so in that region, the Rio Grande Valley, there's like 1 million people, and so you can imagine, right? There's many districts, many students, many educators. Okay, so I've been doing this ed tech thing for a few years, and so there's a group of people that I've gotten connected to. They're other educators, college professors, teachers, whatever it could be, right? My wife is a counselor in a local district, and so she's also connected to this group. And so I had the idea that I posed to them, like, hey guys, why don't we start our own chat to kind of connect each other? We all going through similar things. We need to be able to learn from each other. And our little motto is chat, grow, and impact, right? So you chat, you learn from each other, that's growth, and then you can impact your kids or impact your educational space or educational role. So we started that 2 years ago. This is season 3. And so same thing, very similar to BME's talk. It's our format is 30 minutes, 1 time a week, 4 questions. And so we've been able to meet like so many educators. Like, I mean, everybody that's a teacher, a lot of teachers have Twitter, right?
Yes.
But a lot of teachers are not using Twitter. Okay, they have it, but they're not using it. So from here, we were able to encourage, people that got on to use Twitter to share their voice, right? And so we have a few protocols, right? We're educators, got to keep a professional standards, so keep it clean, be on the up and up. We're not going to be attacking and stuff like that. Now, if there's an issue we need to discuss, we definitely will do that. No doubt. But right, if it's a conversation that you want to have a back and forth, it's probably best to do that face to face. So it's probably good to come, so we do that kind of stuff. But we talk about all things education. Usually September is Hispanic Heritage Month, which is really big around here. We do something that last February, right? Even though it's still cliche, right, to do a Black History Month expose, right? We did connect to some groups and we're able to host a chat every week on we did it on Black History Month, specific quotes from Black educators or famous Black people. And so what we did is they were able to learn about those folks. And so it was really pretty cool, right? It was really cool to do that. And so, so we do that. So now we're getting connected to some groups that are more about policy and more about bringing the rest of the Rio Grande Valley together, and then sharing that with Texas and around the world. So my wife and I host, and so we get on. We're doing the live stream thing now, so it's been pretty cool. So it's going very well, and we love all the educators that get on it. And whoever's listening, you could be someone aspiring to be an educator. You can already be an educator. We love to have anybody on, and we definitely would love to share with you.
That is so great. Now, I know when this episode comes out, it will be 2021, but I want to know this from you. The 2020 was quite the worst year for everyone, to where there was Black Lives Matter movement, the protests, we had the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so much more, the coronavirus, everything. So I want to know this from you. What was your thoughts on all of that happening in 2020 with George Floyd, where we saw the killing of him? What was your thoughts on that?
Okay, so let me tell you real quick about a story from my son. Okay, so my son is 7 years old, right? And so like any parent, let's be straight up, right? So if you're a Black parent, you got kids, periodically you start thinking about when you have to have that conversation with them. Okay, like, okay, when you go out, when you drive, when you do this, when you do that, you can't do this, don't do that. Okay, that's right. So my wife and I talk about that all the time because we want to both be on the same page when he has a question. Okay, so he saw what happened to George Floyd on the news. Okay, so he saw it and he turned right to me, Dad, and said, "Why did the police kill George Floyd?" And so right then, right, we have the nice little DVR, so we were able to pause it, and we had that conversation with him. And we told it from the view that we have, right? Now, I don't judge people on their lens, right? Because everyone has their own lens, okay? Now, what you choose to watch through that lens, that's your choice, okay? What you choose to watch through that lens, that's your choice. But we had that conversation with him, and we told him it was wrong, and this man who did this was wrong, and he should, have some discipline. We have to tell them in terms where they can understand, right? So we got to tell them, like, he was killed. This guy killed this guy, and so he's probably gonna have to go to jail and have some discipline, because they know discipline, like, is punishment, right? So he's gonna have to have some type of punishment. So I will tell you, that was like the most sobering day. That's the most sobering day. One of the most sobering days as a parent that I've ever had, right? That right there. Now, when George Floyd happened, I guess, man, it's kind of like we're so sensitized now. It's kind of like just another brother got killed, right? You're outraged, you're angry, you're upset, but in your lifetime, you may not have seen any change, right? So my wife and I haven't really seen the change. And so what we did is, we did discuss it, and, you're angry about it. People just don't understand. I always tell people, like, okay, yes, you have your view, and we all have our view, and that's okay. We can share and all that, right? I said, but we were asked to speak with some groups, some church groups, some local groups here. And usually the first thing we start out with them is to say, would you ever want to live one day as a Black man in the United States of America? That's what we ask them. That's the first question we ask them. And usually is like, bloop, no silence at all, because nobody wants to do it, because they know what's going on. They know what's going on in the country, and they know that maybe they've not acted in the good of that light, right? So we were definitely very upset. It's very sad, man. It's like just so sad, even as an educator, right? So as an educator, I'm gonna tell you one thing about the Valley. Love the Valley. The people are great, but the N word is a word that's just used and thrown around as this term of endearment for people. So, like, what's up, my nigga? What's up? Without any context, without any note. And in all my years of education, 11 years, I've had only one teacher that has come to me and said, sir, look, I know the students say this. I try to address it. I'm definitely sorry. I'm going to apologize. You know what? Can you please come to my class and let my students know, or just give them a little, some knowledge on the background of the word. So that's happened one time in 11 years. And every day I worked in the high school I was at, every time I go on a campus, I definitely will hear that word, like, all the time. So now it's become a term of endearment. Everybody's using it. It's the popular thing, whatever. But if you don't know, then you can be doing wrong and not know it, right? So now my wife and I have to kind of step up to the plate and do those things. But it's just very sad, man. I mean, Breonna Taylor, it's just so sad, and man, it just it tugs at your heart. And the thing is if you're an educator, you have a chance to reach students, and you have a chance to touch those issues wherever you may be, whatever class may be. Wow. Someone's going to ask you about it, right? These students live on social media, so these things that happen are like real time. So anytime something like that happens, days can go by before you address it. It's just good to just have a discussion, right? The least you can do is have a discussion in your classroom, discussion with students, and answer any questions you can. I mean, we've had to answer questions, a lot of questions. We had a few protests here in the Valley, and personally, we're not like entwined in Black Lives Matter, right? But we do value that, there's things that are going on that are wrong, and those things need to be righted, and those things need to be brought to justice, right? So that's what it is here. I mean, here in the Valley, they have their own kind of issue with the border wall. So that's like a hot topic continually. And so what George Floyd did here kind of was like put that on hold, and people were able to kind of like take that took a backseat to kind of George Floyd. We had a lot of student groups here at the local universities that were doing some protesting, very peaceful, nothing crazy going on. a few people wanted to kind of put them in their place, and so we had some issues with that. But no doubt, no, these are issues that touch our heart. And my wife and I, you know, we're praying folk, we're Christian folk, and so you know, we have to take, you know, we got to love our enemies too. You know, no doubt, we got to love our enemies
Exactly.
too. We do, but you know what? We need to have, sometimes we need to have that conversation with them. You know, and just say it's okay to disagree, but you know what? You know, some things, if you had to walk a day in my shoes or my wife's shoes, then maybe you would see things in a different way. So yeah, that's all right.
Exactly. And I want to know this from you as well. Why do some white people, not all, and also police officers, they see us as a threat? Like we're going to do something to them. Like they see all of us as the bad guy, which all of us, we are not bad guys. And we can't even, I mean, we can't even possibly do nothing. We can't even jog down the street, walk down the street, or do nothing, because if they do, they will see something that is wrong, and we are not doing anything wrong, and they just automatically see us as a threat. Why do you think that? Why do you think they see us as that?
Okay, so we were talking about perspective earlier. I think, right? So if I had my son and I exposed him to just nothing but this, his perspective would be that, right? That's what his perspective would be. So I think some people, honestly, number one, I think some people don't know. Like they just don't know they're doing it, and they don't know they're doing it right. They don't know they're doing wrong. They don't know they're these conjectures they come up with, or these things that they feel like is fact, right? Some people straight up just take one tweet or one post, and that's what they use to shape how they view people, right? That's another thing. That's the popular thing to do, right? Whoever's doing this popular, we take this view. Okay, I can kind of make that relevant to me. Boom. Um, I grew up in the South, right? So I definitely remember the first time I was called the N-word. Like, no joke. Definitely, I was 7 years old. Won't forget that ever. I definitely remember every time I've been trying to. People in the South, like I say, put you in your place. That's what the term was. I definitely remember every time that's happened to me as well. And you know, a real important quick story. My mom and dad were in the Virgin Islands. They never experienced racism till they got to the United States. When they got to the United States, the first time they tried to buy a home, that's when it was up front in their face. And my dad was a minister working in the local community, right? That's what he was supposed to do. So they taught us to, you know, have your friends, you know, whatever, but you have to always be very mindful of the things that you do, right?
Right.
So I think perspective shapes a lot of it, right? So I could, you know, go somewhere and do something, and in some eyes, that area, how perspective, how they've been shaped, will determine how they react to me. And I can go to another place, they can react differently to me, right? Because they have a different perspective. So I definitely feel like it's perspective, but you know, we, right, you can be taught all your life to be one thing or know one thing. When you get to the age of accountability where you can learn on your own, that is when you have to do and find out those things for yourself. So right. My perspective, you know some about mine. I don't know any about yours really, but probably we see life differently, right? You and I. So that's what I'm saying. There's perspective. So but that doesn't make it right, right? So you could go up with perspective, and you could say, okay, I think, well, this is how I did. This is how I grew up. This is how I was raised, whatever. That don't make it right. That doesn't make it right at all. So I don't know the threat, man. I just it sometimes you just, it's like you get like I said, desensitized to it, and instead of you know, because I'm gonna have to have that conversation again with my son. Like, you know, when we go in certain places, these are things we have to kind of like just be mindful of. You know,
Right.
not having be afraid, but just to say, if you're in this situation, here's what you need to do with dad. Make sure you call dad. Make sure you call mom or whatever, and we'll kind of go from there. So I think perspective has a lot definitely to play with it.
Right. Yes, yes. Now I want to end off with this here. And then once this comes out, it will already be 2021, like I mentioned earlier. So we have our First Lady, Dr. Jill Biden, who is an educator. So what do you think of that? We have our first ever First Lady who is an educator. Do you think once, well, she is in office, in the White House, will there be some change happening?
Okay, that is a great question. And that is a question that educators or students, college students, high school students wanting to be educators, they need to already be doing their homework on. Okay, so we have a new education secretary, and I do
Mhm.
think she will be very influential. But I think, right, um, number one, they hired someone who has already been in public education, right? So that background is already there. So that person probably has already had to deal with similar things to being an educator that most teachers around the country have done, right?
Right.
So that is already a good plus. Now, will I think there will be more advocacy for education? Yes. And what I mean by advocacy is there's a lot of people that mention that education is what we need to do, right? We need to improve
Mhm.
education. That's what everybody says. That's great, right? Everybody says we need to stop racism, right? Everybody says it. So
Right.
what are those action pieces that people are going to do now, right? So the United States, there's there's more than 300 million people. So it's not going to take there's not going to be a turn just like that, right? To fix public education. There's no way you can't do it. So I think there will be uh, more communication on what's happening, number one. I do
Mhm.
believe there will be more addressing equity issues, maybe even for students, our special education students, our students who need support in the areas of maybe mental health or access to technology, right? That digital divide, I believe it's going to close. Um, but I do think you have a person now that's just going to be caring about like what happens in education, right? Miss
Yes.
DeVos, who was there, you know, obviously it didn't work out well for her, but there's no one to blame but herself, right? There's no one to blame but whoever was giving her detail, whatever background she had, which was none. So it's hard to help someone who you can't visualize yourself being in their shoes, right?
Right.
So so that number one is definitely going to help already. So the other thing is I think teachers are now being valued to an important degree, right? So this pandemic has kind of showed everyone that it ain't you can't just give a kid a lesson and then have them do it. It doesn't work like that. Someone has to teach them. Someone has to care for them. Someone has to know their likes and dislikes. Someone has to be deeply connected to kind of like move them from okay doing the average to doing the above average or the great or the exceptional, right? So I do feel like those kind of things will be more evident in this administration, right? Now, there's a lot of hype, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
hype. Every time we get a new education secretary, there's always a lot of hype. But in the end, there's not a lot of real change only because, right, from that person's level all the way down to the teacher, there's so much red tape, there's so much bureaucracy, there's right laws that have to be made and passed. And so it's not, I don't want to get hype, but I'm very excited. But you know what? We need to see action, and hopefully those actions will definitely happen.
Absolutely, totally agree with you on that. So, thank you so much. What a great conversation discussion we had. Thank you again for coming on to my podcast. So, where can my listeners follow you on social media?
Awesome. Yes. Again, thanks for the invite. I was definitely glad to be here. So I am on Twitter and Instagram at James Varlack, Varlack. And so definitely follow me on there. I think I'm doing that for right now because the other stuff's a lot of work, website and all that stuff. So we'll start there definitely right now. And again, if I could tell you, if you're an educator right now, or you're a young educator, or you're aspiring to be an educator, all right, social media is a great platform, right? Get on social media, get connected, find your space, find podcasts like uh, this podcast we're on right now, and support, right? Do your best to support, listen weekly, share it with others, and definitely a great time of sharing and learning.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you again for that advice there, and to all of our listeners. So thank you so much. And I hope you take care of yourself during this pandemic we are still in. Hopefully we'll be out of it very soon. So you take care of yourself.
Thank you very much, Damian, for having me on. Stay safe, and many blessings to you for this new year.
Yes, you too as well.